Hey there. So we move on to our next module. In this module, we will look at the work of Edwidge Dandicat and Derek Walcott, two writers from the Caribbean. Edwidge Dandicat is a fiction writer of Haitian descent, and Derek Walcott is a poet and playwright from the island of St. Lucia, and he received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. So, this week we have some discussion questions to answer about the reading, and then we have our second critical analysis. So, Edwidge Dandicat's story, Sunrise, Sunset, is about a woman named Carol who is suffering from Alzheimer's. And the sunrise, sunset game she used to play with her children, Soleil lève, Soleil couche, that's from French. In Haiti, they speak French, and Creole. The sunrise sunset game that she would play with her children is also happening to her memories, right? They're there and then they're not. In this story, we see the use of free indirect discourse, or otherwise called free indirect speech. And this is a narrative technique that's used in a lot of contemporary literature. Free indirect discourse means that the perspective of the narration shifts from an omniscient third-person narrator to the perspective of one particular character. So, this technique involves third-person omniscient narration and then some perspective from a particular character as if it's in the first person. So in Sunrise, Sunset, this happens when the narrative shifts from Carol's point of view and then out again. Or shifts into, I should say, Carol's point of view and then out again. So for example, in the beginning of the story, we get some background on Carol's family, and then the narration shifts into Carol's perspectives with these questions. She's referring to her daughter Jean, and the questions are, doesn't she realize that the life she is living is an accident of fortune? Doesn't she know that she is an exception in this world where it is normal to be unhappy, to be hungry, to work nonstop and earn next to nothing, and to suffer the whims of everything from tyrants to hurricanes and earthquakes? Those questions are particularly from Carol's point of view. So this narrative shift in free indirect speech or free indirect discourse is reflective of the shifts in Carol's consciousness, where one moment she can remember her past or remember where she is, and then she can't. And she goes back to a kind of eternal present. So the discussion board questions, for those, I ask you to find examples of this shift in narration from the third person to a first person perspective in free indirect discourse. Also, think about the end of the story. I look forward to reading what you think those last lines mean. Next, we're going to look at some poetry. Ruins of a Great House by Derek Walcott. To understand this poem, we have to remember that most of the Caribbean, when it was first colonized by Europeans, was used as plantations. These large-scale plantations used slave labor, and the Caribbean was a stop on the transatlantic slave trade. Ships would cross the Atlantic from the west coast of Africa, stop in the Caribbean. People would be taken off, and then some would be taken further up to North America or into South America. And so the great house that Walcott's talking about here refers to the house where the white masters would live. So this house represents all the wealth and the luxury that the white masters enjoyed because of the exploitation and abuse of the enslaved people. So it is that history of colonial exploitation that Walcott is thinking about in this poem. Next, we move on to the second critical response paper. In this essay, you must choose one of the readings from this section of the course and describe how traditions are depicted. So, some of the readings you could choose from would be Alice Walker or Leslie Marmon Silko. They both have that symbol of a blanket in their story. You could choose either Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie or Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Those are the two African writers who talk about how there is some conflict with the imposed British traditions on their native African traditions. Then there's Sherman Alexie and Junot Diaz. Both of those writers are exploring friendship and relationships and how certain cultural norms might affect those relationships. And then lastly, we have Edwidge Dandicat and Derek Walcott. Dandicat talks about motherhood a lot. And so if you wanted to focus on that, you could focus on the idea of motherhood and what memories and traditions a mother would bring to her children. And then for Ruins of a Great House, you want to deal with the colonial history that Derek Walcott is describing and how, the tradition in the Caribbean is also a colonial tradition. So, depending on which text you choose, you'll focus your argument differently. For all of the readings, you can choose use your discussion board post as a starting point. In fact, I expect you to expand on your discussion board posts for the second critical response paper. So double check my announcements for the due date of this essay. I changed it. And remember, I'm available via email if you have any questions about the assignments, and I can very easily schedule a time to meet with you virtually to go over anything you like. I'll be happy to hear from you.